My role in today's conference is as a facilitator. I have no direct experience in economic development, but I have, for the last 30 years, been involved in 3 Nevada businesses that each have had significant operations at both ends of this state. That experience with Harrah's Entertainment, now called Caesars Entertainment, NV Energy, and International Game Technology is the context within which I will share a few brief remarks this morning. While each company has certainly had a different path, the time period from 1980, when my experience with Harrah's began, to 2007 was for all 3 one of revenue growth, growth in capital investment, and in particular, job growth. All 3 companies, with a few bumps along the road, were growing in the robust business climate of Nevada when the year 2008 was rung in. But that changed in the last 3 years. Revenue growth declined or stagnated. Each of the 3 companies, to a greater or lesser degree, had to re-engineer their balance sheets. Capital investments were curtailed or halted altogether. Job losses ranged from roughly 500 at NV Energy to 800 at IGT to in the thousands at Harrah's. Market capitalizations of the companies declined, in some cases significantly. We went from being drunk with success to a very sobering reality in private business. The world had changed, the country had changed, and Nevada had changed. But each has survived the last 3 years, and I believe each will once again thrive. But each one had to restructure for the new reality. Now, what, you may ask, does that have to do with Nevada 2.0? That's a good question. This conference is about exploring best practices and possibilities for restructuring the economy in Nevada for a sustainable future. There are 3 steps that I think about in the private context that were important to restructuring private industry to deal with that new reality, and I think those 3 steps are also applicable to restructuring our economy broadly. The first step is to reject condemnation. We are not here to condemn any industry, any institution, or any political or government leadership. The second is to regain confidence. We have built thriving and robust institutions in this state, both private and public. And over the past 25 years, we have done that because of leadership, ingenuity, and resolve, and a spirit of entrepreneurship. We have weathered difficult storms before 2008 was rung in, and we'll have more storms ahead of us. We have the talent and the resolve to overcome the current circumstances and get out of the ditch we're in. The third step is to renew our vision for the state. In the private context, it was to adjust the sails, as John said earlier. We are here today because we have a collective goal to learn, to explore, to understand the best practices, and to understand our possibilities for the future. My co-facilitator, Dr. Robert Lang from the UNLV Brookings West Institute, is going to set the stage for you this morning, both by talking about where we are in the Nevada economy, and then introduce some best practices from surrounding states. That will be the focus of our morning session. In the afternoon session, we're going to drill down more into what's happening right here in Nevada. So please welcome Dr. Robert Lang.
Thank you. It's great to see a full crowd here. They're loading my PowerPoint right now, hopefully. And while they do that, I'll just make a few logistical notes about how we're going to do this morning. We have 4 speakers coming on, one from Denver, one from Salt Lake, one from Dallas, one from Phoenix. And they're going to take most of their half hour. And, you know, lots of folks in this audience want to ask some questions. Well, you'll have a chance. They're going to go and stay with us through lunch, and then right after lunch, every presenter from the morning is going to return to a panel with business leaders, and the business leaders are going to ask them some questions, and then we're going to turn it to the audience to ask questions as well. So you will have an opportunity, even if the morning is jam full of a lot of information. We're doing this as a kind of quick march through the data, through the comparisons. These are all regions highly relevant for Las Vegas. These are all regions that in one way or another are succeeding at something we're not. And we don't want to fight them, we want to join them. And we want to know what they're doing. And you know, it's funny, they were, you know, when you reach out to somebody and you say, you know, show us how you're doing well so we can do the same. You know, there's always a concern that they'd say, hey, you know, why should we show you guys? Because maybe you'll do it really well. When Las Vegas gets rolling on something, it gets rolling. But there was a bigger picture there. There was a bigger sense of that the whole Intermountain West collectively is in a global economy, and that we're better off cooperating, and that our real competitors are Germany and China, and that these are relatively modest markets in the world sense, but collectively, together, in areas like, for example, just push that, right. In terms of just energy, for example, it's clear that all of us have a role in working collectively and constructively together to deliver a whole new green economy. And so, you know, they are willing to share their thoughts. They're not holding anything back. And they're going to tell us where they went awry, too. I mean, where, you know, not everything went perfectly as they experimented with new methods at economic development. So I'm going to start with just a quick rack-up on the state of the Nevada and the Las Vegas economies. Las Vegas being such a large share of the state's economy, as goes Las Vegas in many ways. So goes the state. And I'll start with just one quick observation right out of the news. I saw the other day, this is disappointing, that IKEA has rejected us. And you see on the slide I put up there, there's the Phoenix one, there's the Salt Lake one. The Denver one is in Centennial. I actually was giving a talk in Centennial. Tom Clark remembers this, when the guy from IKEA was there. And I sat down next to him and I said, you know, hey, what gives? You know, you ever going to put one of these in Las Vegas? And at the time, quite frankly, I wasn't even living in Las Vegas. It just, I recognized it as a market. In fact, look at Las Vegas. I put up not our IKEA, but we've got the World Market Center. So Las Vegas is the largest venue, really, for the whole furniture industry when it comes together and it does large trade shows. And yet there's IKEA. And by the way, IKEA is really a metaphor here. It's not that I've got some hang-up on IKEA. I was once in Sweden at a conference. Some guy said to me, you know what IKEA means in Swedish? Torture. You ever get one of those things in your house and start putting it together and the instructions are in some sort of universal vaguish language, you know, like an alien civilization sent our way to construct so we could create some portal back to them? I mean, that's what IKEA is to me. But IKEA has picked up on something. In other words, who cares about IKEA? You know, we got the World Market Center, but that they picked up on is that we have the lowest education attainment. Their model says that college-educated people buy IKEA furniture. And, you know, on a more serious note, it's not just IKEA making this judgment towards Las Vegas. It's the rest of the U.S. and the rest of the global economy. What you see in that slide, by the way, are comparisons to, you know, funny-sounding places like the Front Range, which is Tucson and Phoenix, or northern New Mexico, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, or the Wasatch Front, which is really all the way from Logan through Salt Lake down to Provo, or the Sun Corridor, or pardon me, the Front Range, I should have said Denver up to Wyoming. These are the 5 big regions that match up with Las Vegas in the West. And the interesting statistic here is that the native-born population of this region has lower bachelor degree attainment than the foreign-born populations in places like Denver, Albuquerque, barely there in the Wasatch Front, but certainly there and just behind in the Sun Corridor, and is about equal to the foreign-born population as a whole. And the reason I raise this is typically foreign-born population in the first or second or third decade they're in the U.S. have lower education attainment, tend to close that gap later on. We've had a lot of recent immigration, but so have these other regions as well. They're doing better at educating the workforce that they're receiving from abroad than we're doing at educating the native-born population of this region. That's how weakly we compare. IKEA knows this. And if IKEA knows this, everybody who's looking at us in terms of industry, in terms of relocation, in terms of building businesses, know it as well. Now, we were, in Las Vegas, this is, once the most affluent metropolitan area in the entire Intermountain West. And we've been slipping. We traded places with Denver. This data ends at the mid-decade, and quite frankly, it doesn't get any better from here. We're going to slip below basically all the peer regions that we have out there in the West. The interesting thing is, there's a kind of anomaly in Las Vegas. When you look at other low education attainment states, we're really in the bottom 5 in bachelor's degrees. And the other states are places like Louisiana and Mississippi. When you look at them, they're not even close to us in income. If we looked at where our peers were in education and matched it to income, we would be on a downward trajectory to the very bottom of the U.S. in per capita income. We would have very little wealth. The reason we have so much wealth is that we were the last industry, the last town that had what you had in the post-war America, where once steel mills gave you a middle-class life with a high school diploma, or a car plant in Detroit gave you, with a high school education rather, an opportunity to be in the middle class. The last place doing it was really Las Vegas. But Las Vegas doesn't have much growth in that area anymore. In fact, a lot of the gaming industry is organized now to project its talent around the globe by organizing similar industries in places like Singapore and India and China. And for that, they need MBAs. So the engine that produced our relative affluence against low education attainment is actually going faulty on us. And so we're at a special risk because we're actually floating up higher in income than anyone would predict based on the baseline levels of education. If we don't rectify this, hello, Mississippi. If we don't rectify this, Mississippi is going to start using us for purposes of comparison to the rest of the country and saying, well, there's always Nevada. Because that's the direction we're heading. We don't have to. I've said previously, I'm the ghost of Christmas future on this. These are the things that may happen. These are not the things that have to happen. We can have a revelation. We can get generous in some ways, smart in other ways, and figure out a way out of this. And I think we will. And I'll show you why in a moment. We are the most volatile state economy at twice the U.S. average for volatility. This is a measure of ups and downs in the economy. And this is from Moody's Analytics. This is from the stakeholders report that Stephen mentioned earlier. And this is from an effort to try to catalog where we were in relative terms to other states by way of comparison. And it was a poor comparison, I'm afraid to say, in many categories, including industrial diversity. You see there, Utah and California are practically clones of the overall global economy and the U.S. economy. 1.0 equals the overall U.S. economy. They're closing in on having such diversity, even though in a case of Utah, a relatively small state, that they're essentially in sync with the U.S. as a whole. I mean, they go into recessions. Don't get me wrong, as does the U.S. writ large. But they don't go into a deeper recession than the rest of the U.S. typically because they have representations of industries that in one way or another, maybe that sector's doing better in this recession. We're in all the sectors that did the worst in this recession. Arizona has some of that quality, and there's some other western states thrown in as well. You see, we have Alaska, and they're over-reliant on energy. We have D.C., they're over-reliant on the most lucrative thing of all, which is we send them money. Okay, so they got that racket. We don't have that racket. We didn't work that racket. Our racket was working for a while. It's not working as well as it used to. And our racket was actually commerce and not government. And it is commerce that relies on there being high discretionary income in the world and in the country And it was the exact opposite in 2008. Now, Reno, interestingly enough, on this graphic, shows up to have been a little more economically diverse. But here's how the Moody's folks read that back to me. They said, you know, actually what it is that in relative terms, Reno has more diversity because Reno's main engine of economic growth, its gaming industry, declined in relative terms. So that one of the reasons Las Vegas, for example, has so little diversity is that's how well we were doing in the one key driving industry, gaming and tourism. And it's actually a good thing in a way. But what it meant is that in this region especially, lots of things were thrown by the wayside as we rushed towards the huge pot of gold that was gaming. And what you have now in this region right now is that 2 million people reside here. And if you look across a series of metrics on what you would expect in bioscience, what you would expect in all sorts of other sectors, business services, we look like a city of a couple of 100,000. We're importing medical services. We're importing higher education services. We're importing all producer services outside of gaming. Everything in accounting and so on are really phoned in from Southern California. One of the strategies for economic diversity is merely lifting to some modest level the sectors that we have so far sacrificed in pursuit of the one key industry that has succeeded so well and built a region up from 250,000 people in 1970 to 2 million today. And so backfilling and fixing where we should have representation on these sectors goes a long way towards economic diversification. The assumption Moody's makes, I think the assumptions that any reasonable person would make, is that for all intent and purposes, gaming will be the main driver. Let's let it shine by backfilling in a series of sectors that one would predict at a city of 2 million would have a certain amount of education services, a certain amount of healthcare services. We don't need to be Denver in telecom. We don't need to be San Diego in biotech. We don't need to be the Silicon Valley in electronics. We don't need to be Houston in energy. We just need to get back to a point where those shares of those sectors reflect reasonably a metropolis of 2 million or a state of 2.7 million. And doing that is a big part of the fix. We also have, and this is a good point to raise, very productive workers in the specialty where we have focused. In other words, we have the highest productivity of gaming workers. We have a very hard-working workforce. I don't think anybody who visits this city would deny that. Anybody I have as a guest to the city, and now that I've moved here, I have lots of house guests, by the way, it turns out. It's a popular place. Note to me, this town's full of hustle. I can't put, a suitcase down, somebody out reaching out, sort of grabbing it and rolling with it on me. And I say, that's a good thing about Las Vegas. We have just not matched that to the new sectors of the economy that are now growing. We have matched it beautifully to the sector of the economy that built this region from a fairly modest place, or the state from a fairly modest place, to a globally reaching metropolis. This is a state of not even 3 million people, and we have an airport you can fly to Asia and to Europe on. That's not that common a thing. There are whole big states out there you can't do that in. There are states that used to have that capacity, like Missouri, that are losing that capacity. That kind of global reach is what we will build on. But we are way more dependent on consumer spending than really anywhere else. We're dependent on the very sector of the economy that took the hit in 2008, and the one where it appears that there is going to be the longest, slowest recovery in. In other words, this country had a business model as a whole of developing consumer markets, of creating wealth through real estate, and then creating financial instruments that allowed you to leverage and access that wealth well before retirement, and then to use that to spend on consumer goods and to spend on discretionary items like travel and tourism in places like Las Vegas. And that appeared to crash in 2008 when we maxed out on that. And the recovery of the country is now put in terms of, wouldn't it be good if we made things again? Wouldn't it be good if we exported again? Well, Las Vegas is actually the country's largest service exporter in gaming services, and that economy will revive. Supplementing that service export with some goods export and some trade and logistics would go a long way towards fixing the problem around here. Right now, our goods export is $250 a year versus $3,000 a year in Salt Lake City. If we got to 1,000, that would be a start towards this diversity that would build a resilience into the economy that would allow us to go through the next down cycle in a way where the state doesn't look like it's teetering on the edge of civilization, as it appears in the media today. It's also very bad optics for the state, very bad public relations for it to appear as distressed and dysfunctional as it does at the moment. It doesn't help us attract companies, quite frankly. Resilience is part of a longer strategy in making sure that we never get to a point again where we become the case study for the country in what's gone wrong with the U.S. economy as a whole. We have fertile ground for tech expansion in that we have very few workers in those sectors. If we brought them to near median, we would again vastly expand the economy. But there is a very high correlation between the number of bachelor's degrees you hold and your share of tech workers. There's no denying this. If we do not close some of the education attainment gaps that we have with competing regions, no amount of favorable business climate is going to substitute for the human capital inputs that they find are necessary as the basis for their industry. And that needs to be said, and said often, and said in hard terms, meaning there's just no escaping it. And so we are at risk. The big risk is that we have lived off an industry that was perhaps the last great sector to produce routine middle-class living for people who had finished a high school diploma and gone no further. We went decades past some of the other places like Pittsburgh or Detroit that provided a similar opportunity. But we are where they are. We are where Pittsburgh and Detroit are right now, which is to say we will see growth in this. We will see some recovery in this sector. We see it already. This is probably the best consumer electronics show we've had in the city. But we cannot use this as an engine of growth that would expand the state's economy, nor fix the budgetary shortfalls that we see before us, because we are taxing too narrowly, off too narrow an economic base, to provide anything like the structural stability that's necessary to go through, and we can count on this, future recessions, and not find ourselves in the kinds of dire straits we are now. With that, I want to talk about quickly the morning sessions and then turn to the information that we're going to get out of these regions. The first two presentations, we're going to go through half an hour each, and then we're going to take a break. Those first two presentations are on tech-based economic development. And tech-based economic development is somewhat separate from a broader and more comprehensive economic development in that it literally attempts to seed through R&D, through research and development, new industry that through basic and applied research finds translation into startup firms that ultimately, some of which expand and produce more revenue and more employment for the state's economy. And what you're going to hear are examples from Ted McAleer out of Salt Lake City, the U-Star system, and out of Todd Hardy from Phoenix on SkySong, on how partnerships have formed between those states, business leaders in those states, venture capital networks in those states, and the university to ensure that strategic investments made in sectors that look to be competitive areas for the state based on the regional capacity in the economy and the state's research specialties by its faculty, that building off of those capacities, investing in those research areas and developing those technologies, and most importantly, bringing business in from the ground floor and assuring that it is business that decides and that it is investors and entrepreneurs who decide what are the promising technologies to take out of those schools and bring them to market. The universities and the state are in no position to pick who the winners are in the economy. That's not the role they play. Rather, they are a public good. And the public good is to generate a sufficient base level of technology and competency so that there is something to apply to the private sector. It's not that you need to pick winners, it's that without strategic investment of this sort, there appears to be no winners. And the market decides which of these technologies are promising. And I think it's always surprising whenever you go on these endeavors, some of the areas that look like they would be pretty weak market applications turn out to have amazing application. The next two presentations are on more comprehensive development strategies out of Denver. And we've got Tom Clark from Denver and Mike Rosa from Dallas. And they're going to talk about how those two regions have succeeded. Denver, having had a really rough recession in the early 1980s, highly over-specialized in the energy sector after the market crashed and energy prices came down, that region was just about ready to turn out the lights. And they sat down and looked at what their opportunities were and charted a course for development to the point where they are the most successful region, large scale, in the whole Intermountain West. And Dallas is a place we can learn from, because Dallas used its position in the global economy as a world city to build an enormous metropolis, an enormous economic machine, and opportunity for its citizens. It has what we have, which is we have an airport. We might not have an NFL team. Pittsburgh's got one. They got a terrible airport. You can't get anywhere out of there. Kansas City, pro team, no airport. Cleveland, watch out. United and Continental just combined. You ain't going to hear from Cleveland again. Ain't no way to get there. We have the wonderful thing of tourism. Tourism is connection. Connection is economy. In other words, the industry we built out of bringing people here so that they could enjoy themselves in this state and in this city has also built the connections to the global economy that people can ride in for businesses of all types and all sorts of trade. And even if an airline like US Airways decides, you know, we're sick of you folks and we're not going to have a hub here anymore, move over. We'll find somebody else, because everybody wants to have some connection to this city based on tourism. And so what we have is a globally reaching airport, one that's about to complete an international terminal. And if you don't think international airports have any value to regional economic growth, I want you to sit down with the folks of Atlanta and Dallas, and they'll tell you how they were once regional centers, small metropolises, southern cities after World War II, and that investment in that capacity was one of the leading reasons they have emerged as the world cities that they are, and that they have attracted branches of global business to them in high-paying sectors like management consultancy, finance, accounting, media, you name it, you name the category, and they have it in those cities. We have that capacity. We have the capacity to be a world city. We have a state that will gain tremendously from that capacity. But the thing really holding us back is that we really, at this moment, have a mismatch between the human capital training in the workforce and the realities of the new economy that's emerging in the 21st century.